And so I've been asked to make a few comments on this same issue, the review process, and I did take a look at the alternatives analysis that was done for this project in preparation for speaking, and we can go to the next, here we go. I'm just going to quote from their alternatives analysis so you can see the context. That the portfolio development process began at the request of a number of Midwestern governors requesting help from MISO to meet their respective RPS targets, which I thought this was somewhat amusing. It just sounds like the governors got together in a club somewhere and they said, we really need MISO to bail us out on this RPS compliance, and so we're going to start down this road. The alternatives analysis does indicate that the only alternatives considered by MISO were alternative locations for wind generation. Wind is it. There is no other alternative for meeting renewable requirements. And that in the western MISO, including Iowa, the wind blows harder and more often. And therefore, even if it's only 5% harder or more often or 10%, that's it. We're going out there to get that wind and we're going to bring it into other states. And finally, this is a helpful statement early in the document. There is not a feasible non-transmission alternative to this project. And this is an important element of this whole discussion. The MVP portfolio was designed assuming all individual components would be constructed. It's all or nothing, and this is just one of 17 elements. Selecting any alternative other than this project would result in reduced benefits to the entire MISO region and would undermine the grand bargain struck by the MISO states. You may not know that you entered into a grand bargain years ago with a governor that's already gone. But it's really more of a devil's bargain because basically this says that in 2008, we shut the door and there's no more discussion. Unfortunately, in the context of an individual state PSC, many PSCs accept that this is the way it is, that we do not have any clout, MISO rules, and that's it. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. I'm going to spend a few minutes on the case study, which is the Mark Twain 345 kV segment that I worked on a couple of years ago. In the alternatives analysis that was done for the Cardinal Hickory Creek, they indicate low voltage alternative would be more costly, so we won't do that. And this is an important thing to understand. None of these individual segments get compared on their economic benefit individually, meaning we are not looking at whether the economic benefit of spending $500 million on 125 miles of transmission is better or worse than putting rooftop solar in everybody's home. That $500 million is just lost within 17 other projects. And the low voltage alternatives would be paid by the customers in Wisconsin. And they're saying, you're only 10% of the bigger picture, so we're only going to compare 10% of what you pay for Cardinal Hickory Creek to any alternative in the state. Where that logic fails is you pay 10% for every one of those 17 projects. So your bill is very big, but your bill for what happened in Wisconsin is small. The non-transmission alternatives do not increase the transfer capability between Iowa and Wisconsin. Well, the point is to reduce the amount of fossil fuel use, and that's the ultimate point. It's not just to build wires between Iowa and Wisconsin, but one of the objectives of the project has morphed into simply building wires from Iowa to Wisconsin as a fundamental objective. And then finally, a no-action alternative does not meet project purpose and need objectives. Well, it definitely does if the fundamental objective is reducing carbon fuel use, which is what is the stated purpose of these, the RPS purpose of this project. So it's important to reframe this discussion from the purpose of the project is to build transmission lines from Iowa to Wisconsin to the purpose of the project is to reduce the use of fossil fuel and how we do that. Without this regional transmission backbone, the wind generation has to be sited close to load, requiring the construction of significantly larger amounts of wind capacity. And I started talking about that in the earlier discussion. We're talking incremental additional construction in-state to offset the construction just of wind without talking about solar. So let's go back to the case study. And this is very similar to Cardinal Hickory Creek. This this would be from Ottumwa, Iowa, down here onto the Mississippi River, Palmyra. This is the link that is the case study I'm talking about, which is the Mark Twain 345 kV. About the same distance and that about the same existing transmission capacity, and that these are 161 kV lines, these green lines. And then the line proposed is this dashed red line. I just stopped at the border of Missouri because I was speaking before the Missouri PSC and they didn't care what was going on in Iowa. And so in this case, they said, well, there's a bunch of wind that MISO found out here called the Adair wind zone, 400 or 500 megawatts of wind potential. And we can't move all that wind to bigger load centers without putting in this 345 kV line. And so my job was to assess the capability of these existing transmission lines to carry this wind. And in the course of that research, we found that wind developers had actually applied to MISO to do exactly that. And that in order to move somewhere between 300 and 450 megawatts of wind out of this spot, which is the entire potential of that spot, MISO had determined that $12 million, $11 million worth of upgrades would be necessary on these lines. And the developer would pay every dime of it. So to move 400 megawatts of wind out of this point into load centers would cost the consumer nothing, and not 500 million on a 345 kV line. And so I thought, I'll give credit to any team of interveners, both citizen interveners and citizen interveners that hook up with experts. You're going to have a very good shot if it's a level playing field, because they really didn't do much homework before making this proposal. The problem is there is no level playing field. So you can make a great case and you may get some tweaks to the project, but it's very hard to stop the project. And in this case, we methodically went down every one of the arguments that they had made that, well, it could be that we lose 2 of these lines and this load wouldn't be met. Well, you're now talking about highly improbable events, which the reliability requirements anticipate and say, well, if you're basically in an act of God situation, you can drop load to an area for a certain period of time, because the alternative would be you spend $500 million building a line for an event that may never happen. And so ultimately, I'll go back to an earlier comment of mine, the new kid on the block is MISO. They've only been around a little while, and they have largely negated the power of the individual state PSCs. And I think a grassroots campaign directed at the ISO would be quite effective, because it's almost like the Wizard of Oz, where until you challenge the legitimacy of the Wizard of Oz, he rules. But when you pull back that curtain, you see that this is a pretty shallow rooted plant. And so my experience has been, if it's a level playing field, you have a good shot. And the objective is to go after the institutions that have made that playing field very unequal and difficult. And my experience has been too that big institutions that don't normally get attacked overreact when you go after them, because they are not ready for that. And if Wisconsin could be, and I'm speaking partly as an activist here because this is happening in my hometown as well, if Wisconsin could be the first state in the nation to back out of an ISO, that would be a great thing, because it is not, it really does undercut the state's autonomy and the state's ability to craft its own future at a time when the energy area is changing so fast, and we can do it all technically, we can do it all economically, but we have to leapfrog these institutions that are preventing that from happening. Thank you.
So, questions? I think this might allow you guys to answer if I may bring it up. Does that work now? Okay, let me check over here. Okay, questions? We're going to go the honor system here. This is the first one I saw here, so you can pass over.
How would the state of Wisconsin back out of an ISO?
Good question. Nobody's ever done it. But Wisconsin voluntarily entered into one. And so there's got to be a way out, because if it's not serving the interests of the state or it's the utility customers, and I think one way you would do it is somebody has to commission an economic study or do that study and say, hey, our rates are going up, up, up at a time when load is flat or declining. We are behind other states in planning for a clean energy transition. And we're building a lot of infrastructure that does not seem to have a solid purpose behind it. And just point out that, in fact, that's what I do in these interventions that I'm involved in, is what's the relative cost of going with this program versus an alternative, and demonstrate that, and that may be a decision that can be made by the state. It would be an uphill battle. But if you're clearly paying a lot of money for little or no gain, that would be the basis of it.
I'm Dave Barron from, Dad, can you hear me now? I'm Dave Barron from the center part of Oconto County. And in this region of the country, Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska, where they had this wind channel coming through, these developers who are said they're paying for it in full, are they the same developers that were being subsidized by our government to another country to develop here? And I'm referring to Germany, Spain, Italy. They were subsidized by our country to come here and develop a wind farm for their special interest. And it would be their profit going back to their country.
I don't know. Are you talking about the production tax credit, the federal tax credit that pays them?
I'm not quite sure there.
Well,
And I recall reading there was an approval in the Midwest part of the country for a couple thousand wind farms or wind turbines going up through the multiple states, and that they were not from here in the United States, they were from offshore, being subsidized by our government to be here. So it sounds like they're paying for it.
well, yeah, a lot of the big wind companies have foreign ownership, and a lot of the money ends up, we pay taxes. They talk about these production tax credits. They save us all money with cheap wind energy. Except we're the ones paying the tax credits. Where do taxes come from? They come from us. So we're paying these tax credits, and these companies are making a bundle of money, and half of them are taking it offshore. So big wind is a problem. It's become a real problem. The big corporate wind farms that build these gigantic wind farms, as far as you can see, they're just money generators on the tax credit, and these tax credits are going to expire completely, I think, by 2021 or 2020. So they are in this big, giant push to try and get as many wind turbines and transmission lines built as they can before this credit goes away.
Thank you, that's kind of what I was looking for.
Yep.
Hi, John Walte here. I've got a two-part question concerning our mid-continent independent service provider, system provider. Can you, for those who may not know,
A little louder.
any one of you, can you, for anybody who doesn't know, explain who MISO is and who's on the board of MISO? And then the second part of my question is, why is it that no one else except for MISO or any of these other system operators can afford to produce, which the earlier panel said was really easy to do, a cost-benefit analysis, which of course we all know in this room, if we actually saw one about this area, this project would fail the test, because there is no benefit analysis for anybody. So why is it we can't get an independent cost analysis? Is it so expensive that you just can't do it? This other gentleman over here said he could get a bunch of students to do it in a few days. So why haven't we done that? Why hasn't that been done in other areas?
It's a good question on projects that I haven't been involved in. I know to date, usually what has happened is a little different here with Cardinal Hickory Creek, because you're preparing in advance, whereas in the other cases, these projects were already in the pipeline with the PSC, and it's more reacting to a proposal getting organized, whereas there's no reason an analysis couldn't be done because the cost information is public for Cardinal Hickory Creek, and there's no reason it couldn't be done. It's a good suggestion, and it should be done. It should be done fast, so that you've got the basis of a hearts and minds campaign to say this is going to cost us a lot of money and it's not going to give us a benefit. It's a good idea to do it now before the process gets rolling.
Well,
I'm trying to get them to put the map of the wholesale markets up. Okay. It's not happening.
MISO is a cartel of utilities. It's a membership organization of public utilities, a lot of whom have investors, and they're more interested in their dividends than they are really serving the public, and I think that was addressed here before. And all their money, by the way, comes from you, comes out of your electric bill. They charge their members, and their members pass it on to you.
Just one comment on that whole model, which is not that old. It's only about 20 years old, and it is an artifact of deregulation, of electricity deregulation. But one very challenging aspect of it is, even though it's a private corporation setup, they are the Federal Electricity or Energy Regulatory Commission designee for their area when they become an operator. And so, because that's federal, they have asserted effectively since their beginnings that they trump state-only public service commissions. And the courts have consistently found that to be true. So that once you're pulled into an ISO, even though in theory it's just there to serve as a referee and make sure there's no congestion and your reliability is good, it's become an engine for doing transmission projects. And when states have pushed back consistently, the courts have found for federal authority trumping state authority. So it's just an entity that originally wasn't seen to be so toxic, but has become that way in asserting this kind of private authority over state authority.
Correct me for anything that I might say here, but back in the late 80s, early 90s, when American Transmission Company wanted to expand their horizons out of Wisconsin and become a small multi-state utility, they didn't want to take care of the management of what they were creating. So within their inner walls, they went back to the State Public Service Commission to develop the entity of MISO. And by doing that to fund them, they requested the funds to be handed over to the customers to bring in income to support this entity. As American Transmission grew across the country, teaming up with the other utilities, our MISO became the black widow of our utilities, and they were given a power that they don't know how to stop right now, and they created an authority of money over our senators that they really can't control, and the people are stuck with the remains of what's going on.
That sounded like a very good statement. Was that a question or a statement?
I'm just a logger.
As a logger, you just nailed it. So that was a good job. Okay. Frank, with just a minor correction that ATC was founded in the year 2000, so a little bit later than the 80s. But other than that, I thought you framed it pretty well.
Ask a legal question. Is there an appeal process to the decision that the PSC makes? And if there is, who does the appeal go to, and who decides the issue then?
Yes, there is an appeal process. It goes to whoever gets into court kind of decides where it's going to go first. So in the case of the town of Holland, it went to La Crosse So and then from there, it goes to a court of appeals, and then from the court of appeals, it can go to the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court wants to hear the case. So yes, there absolutely is an appeal process. The problem with the appeal process, and the reason that you have to pick your issues very carefully, is that there's an enormous amount of deference to the Public Service Commission. So you've kind of got this dual thing where the Public Service Commission is deferring to MISO, which is a combination of private power backed up by the government. Mussolini called that the definition of fascism. So you've kind of got this situation, and they think that they have very good reasons, but it's kind of a scary thing to think about. So they're deferring to MISO, and then the courts, because of the way that the laws developed in Wisconsin, and most other states true as well, is there's an enormous amount of deference to the Public Service Commission because they're treated as an expert decision maker. That's why it's really important that if you have an alternative that you ensure push at every level, at every opportunity, to ensure that that alternative is developed to a reasonable degree of comparability and that the information about the alternative is spread around so that you are getting that into the hands of, into the ears of legislators, into the media, all that kind of stuff. And it's also important that you focus on as clear of a legal question as you can, and that's why you need a good lawyer in that kind of situation, because you got to figure out where, what's going to fly. Because this stuff takes, a lot of work.
So I wanted to tell you a little bit about when the Badger Coulee line was first introduced in our area in the Kickapoo Valley. A lot of what was talked about made me feel very helpless and wondered what the heck could we really do to fight this. I'm only one person and we're a small community. What power do we really have? What happened was that a number of just citizens got together and we pooled our money, put them into non-interest bearing savings account in partnership with our credit union, got Organic Valley on board, and they put $50,000 into a non-interest bearing savings account. And that money was then used to fund solar projects for the past 4 years. And to date, over $350,000 has been loaned out for individuals to put solar on their residences and their businesses. So as far as how to make a difference and how to divest from MISO and the PSC, it's how to become more energy independent. And that's why we formed Local Energy Generation, because that's what we believe in. So a small number of people can make a big difference. And I wanted to share that with you to maybe give a little hope.
Just a quick comment on the ISOs, independent system operators. Internet's not being fun with us, but there's partial map of a couple of the independent system operators in the United States. On the other side of that, you've got California. At the moment, has its own independent system operator. MISO is definitely the largest one. It goes all through the mid-continent in one of the Canadian provinces. Southwest Power Pool, and then Texas. I always love it. Texas is doing its own thing. It's got its own wholesale market. New England has its own wholesale market too, ISO. One thing they're doing is those states have very aggressive renewable portfolio standards, and they're actually kind of pushing back on their independent system operator, and it looks like those states are going to get the independent system operator to change its rules so as to accommodate the renewable portfolio standards at the local level. And then New York, where I study, its independent system operator is the same as the state, so it only includes the state, and their Public Service Commission it doesn't have official jurisdiction over the ISO, but it can push it around and tell that one what to do. So the MISO is definitely a challenging governing structure to interact with, to put it mildly. I got no idea what's going in there.
I have a question.
We can't get this, yeah, so this is MISO right here.
Wow.
There's New York, New England, California's got one, Texas has got one. These are also markets, right? These are the wholesale markets. So there's no markets in the South. They don't like markets in the South. They like oligarchies. Yeah, but it seems to me the bigger the territory of your wholesale market, the more challenging it is to interact with it. So there's not a lot of trouble with the New England wholesale market, because New York wholesale market, because it's just a state, and the state can kind of boss it around. Here, you got all sorts of challenges with how the states are supposed to interact with that thing.
I have a legal question I'd like to ask to this gentleman right here. As the county boards, right here, as the county boards approve or disapprove of this, does that have any effect at all on the legal status of this here?
He's referring to resolutions that have been.
Right. Resolutions are useful because they help motivate people, and counties should do them. It gives the sense of the community about the transmission line. They do not, you cannot, the construction or non-construction of the transmission line does not depend in any way on the passage or non-passage of the county.
If the county disapproves, they'll just go right ahead and go through it then, is what you're saying?
Right. What happened back when they right after ATC got established, they wanted to build a transmission line essentially from Superior down to Wausau. It was called Arrowhead to Weston. They named them after the substations. And they couldn't go through the tribe area, and they wanted to go through Douglas's county's forestry, right, their county forest. And Douglas County said no. Well, ATC went to the legislature and they got that taken care of. So now essentially the Public Service Commission has the ability to override through its routing decision and through its decision to construct the transmission line any kind of local regulation that's standing in the way.
Well, me and my wife Gloria here are from Grant County, and we can't seem to get even Grant County to do anything, not even disapprove it or anything. So I'm very disappointed in them.
That's unfortunate. Hopefully, as people get more upset now that this is becoming more real, unfortunately, that will change, because you do need grassroots. You do need to go. Legislators need to feel the heat from the grassroots. They need to be asking the Public Service Commission, asking themselves, what? Falling load and more wires. What's not right about this picture?
We'll get you a mic here.
Just a little question on Wisconsin dropping out of, for example, MISO. Would this be a state one move, or does every individual wholesale energy provider have to drop out on their own? And I understand, I think it was in Tennessee or somewhere where some people dropped out of MISO, and it was very costly to them because they had to pay their share of all the capitalized costs for the next 30 years or so.
And to be fair, I'm not sure, one, if there has been an exit from MISO. There may have been, and I'm not sure what the procedure would be to do it. But I am recommending that it be pursued, because the system is not working. And I am sure that they would do everything in their power to try and keep a utility in. But a comparable situation, though it's not an ISO situation, is the city of Boulder in Colorado, which wants to municipalize. They told XL, we're not going to renew your franchise, we're going to municipalize. And XL has been fighting them tooth and nail to prevent them from doing that. I would expect something similar, but That means Excel is now on the defensive. They are not just giving orders. And the objective is looking for a way to get some offense going the other direction. It may be it probably would be a long, hard pull, but at least you're on offense instead of always on defense.
I don't know if this is on. Yeah, thank you. I'm John Warder. I'm from the Western Dane Preservation Campaign. That's the eastern side of this long string of activist organizations to stop this. First of all, I want to thank the speakers who've given valuable time to come here and share their knowledge. Mr. Jablonski said something that sort of keyed my question, which was that need is the first criteria under which you have to determine whether or not you're going to build one of these lines. I attended the Grant County presentation from ATC a week or so ago, and the presenter, Mr. Callaway, I think was his name, something close to that, and he publicly stated that ATC realizes there is no need in terms of electric requirements in the future. He said it was 0.5 to 1% maybe over the next several years. So with several other people, we found Mr. Callaway and another presenter at the door because we weren't allowed to ask questions, only the board members were asked questions. So we caught them at the door. We sort of, we didn't really corner them because they had the door, but what I learned was, by attending that meeting, was the passion and the strength of knowledge of the people that attended that meeting, which gave me great hope. But I was able to ask Mr. Callaway to confirm that there was no need of particular concern in order to build the line. I asked him to repeat what he said in the meeting, which was, it's reliability. ATC is talking about reliability. So I followed up and I said, well, what statistics can you share with us regarding reliability? Is there a 1%? Is there a 0.5%? Is there 1 hour a year that we don't have electricity? He said, he avoided the question, of course. He said, it will be in the filing that they do in April. I said, you've had several years. ATC has been planning this for years. You must already have that information. Why are you not sharing that with us? There was no answer. But I got great hope from attending the Grant County meeting, and I suggest anyone who can go to any one of these meetings. It wasn't what I learned at the actual presentation. It was interfacing with all of the other folks like yourself, which gave me hope. And thank you all for coming to this meeting as well.
Can I just make a comment on the reliability issue? Okay, one of the things that we did for the town of Holland, they wanted to construct these transmission lines, and we already got stuck with the previous set of transmission lines, and then on the other side of the highway, they want to put, another set. And so if we're going to get stuck with them, at least please put them all together. And they said, no, we can't, because that's bad reliability. And what it turns out is that they keep stretching, just like they keep stretching the criteria of need. Need now means reliability, and then they keep expanding reliability. All that they have to do is establish plans, because sometimes the power lines are going to go down, right? Sometimes we're going to have acts of God that force the transmission lines down, and we're going to have problems with our electrical system. This happens in the world, and there are many ways for them to deal with that. One of the ways for them to deal with that is to agree to pay people if we got trouble with the transmission lines. We're going to put you off. We're going to put you off. And people will accept money. Businesses will accept money and accept that risk. But they keep pushing the reliability standards, or keep saying the reliability standards are not being met, but they keep pushing them up, and they're not very explicit about that. This is a very good question to be asking ATC. Really, what is the reliability? Because there are standards, okay? Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has standards about these things, and we are way above those standards.
So are they not including demand side reductions as a reliability measure?
They don't want to take people offline, or they're not going to look at that. They're not going to look at that. Just like they won't look at just the way they say that, we've got congestion. We've got congestion because we're not going to take these people's load management. It's manipulated. To me, it appears to be manipulated so that they can construct the transmission line, which of course they want to do because they're a transmission company.
Hi. Am I on? I guess I'm on, yeah. There's a few things that we have been stressing in recent meetings John and I have attended. Number one is we're dealing here with a 20th century technology for large urban fossil fuel plants. I guess we all know that, but a lot of people don't know that, and I think it's helpful to stress that there are better 21st century technologies out there. My closest friend is a designer of these large municipal rapid-fire gas power plants, and he knows that solar or renewable energy in combination with a rapid start gas plant is more efficient and less cost than these enormous urban plants, coal and nuclear. I think it's a visual scourge on the landscape. I don't need to say any more about that, but we've spent millions of dollars in tourism to develop this area, and it's going to look like the area just north of Chicago. They estimate that they're going to be up and ready in 2 years. And if there's no need in 10 years, they don't need this for at least another 8 years because there's no need for it. Little to no benefit for the driftless area that I've heard of. And if we are going to have them, I think we should force them to bury them. I know this is not ATC's technology modality. They want to build towers. That's how they do things. But I think with enough force from the public, we can get them buried, which would be a far better alternative in any case, as far as I'm concerned. I would, if there is an additional cost to burying them over, putting them up in the sky where I have to look at them every day, I'd much rather pay that extra cost. The thing that I wanted to bring to your attention very quickly is that in the Mount Horeb Mail, they published last week a list of the myths, ATC did, wrote a letter to the editor, and they've got the myths. These myths are, I'll read them very quickly, and then you can respond to them. The utilities do not need to demonstrate to the Public Service Commission that this line is needed or provides a cost-benefit analysis. I've never heard anyone objecting to the ATC line allege that there wasn't. In other words, these are shibboleths that they're putting forward to misinform the public and calling us extremists and radicals in this regard. Another myth is the line is too expensive and money would be better spent on energy efficiency. Another myth is the poles will be 180 to 200 feet tall. I've never seen anything over 170, and they admit that they'll be 160. So they're creating a fear and that we are part of a radical group and therefore delegitimizing our point of view. I think it's really important that we speak to the facts, but we also speak to the fact that ATC is in this for their own pocketbooks.
Could I just make a couple of comments? My name is Wayne.
Can we get answers to the last thing?
Who wants to? That sounded like questions for you, dude.
I don't know what the questions are.
But then Keryn, that last comment.
Well, I can talk about propaganda because that's what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you confront propaganda?
That's a propaganda tactic called name calling. Whoa.
Sorry, just get it closer.
Closer? Oh, to me? Okay, it's name calling. They try and take their enemies and give them a bad name. NIMBY, is that one that resonates here? They're calling you a bunch of NIMBYs, and then therefore everyone should discount whatever you have to say about the project. So even if you have good facts and you're perfectly logical and you're right, people aren't supposed to listen to you because you're lying about how tall they are and you're exaggerating about this and you're exaggerating about that. And, you know, that is a tactic, and I do believe that, is it ATC that's behind this? They use a lot of propaganda. When I was doing the case at FERC, they actually, one of the witnesses they got out there to go against me was a guy from ATC here in Wisconsin. And they brought him there to say that we need to do this kind of propaganda and therefore ratepayers need to pay for it. He lost anyways, but that's just propaganda, and to counter it, you just got to keep doing what you do and ignore it and maybe expose the fact that it is propaganda and that you are not saying these things they're saying that you said, and go on with your own simple talking points and maybe just ignore them and pound your own talking points, and maybe people will listen to you instead.
My name is Wayne. I've been participating in these kind of issues since 1978 when I moved to Wisconsin. I just want to warn you that the utilities have armies of people and they're not all stupid. And when you say that there's an elephant in the room that nobody's talking about, why is it so simple as do you need more lines? Why do you need more lines to serve less electricity? And my answer as an expert is there's a different vision for the future, and you're just not understanding the full vision of utilities, and therefore when they talk privately with utility commissioners or the FERC staff or whatever, they're all colluding in a vision that you should be aware of. And part of that vision is increasingly renewed electrification. And if you don't know what renewed electrification is, it's sales promotion of electricity for uses that are not being used for electricity now. And until you start figuring out where they're coming from and where there are arguments really are, you can be in trouble, because there used to be an old saying about a red herring. They dangle a red herring up and get you to debate and talk about it, shake it around, and it's really not that kind of fish. It's really something else, and you need to find some experts that understand what else is going on. What does the death spiral mean? What does the duck curve mean? What is happening in California to scare people? Why is it they're scared by $350,000 being spent on solar? So I could talk a long time about this, but I wish I could get to some of you to at least have a dialogue to give you better understanding, because clearly I agree with your perspective, but I'm saying when you have a debate or a fight with people, you need to understand where they're really coming from, not what they say. You know, it's clearly not reliability. I've lost power at my house 10 times in the last year. I've testified to that fact at the Public Service Commission. How can this be? How can it be that I approved programs in the 1990s that could completely wipe out all these peaks? Why don't utilities do this? I can speculate about why they haven't done this, but nobody's even talking about why don't utilities do these? They know that they can. Until you get at the why, maybe you'll have a better perspective on how to solve the problem.
Keryn has been very involved in citizens immersing themselves in the actual structures with the utilities and FERC, and can talk about that, the effect of that.
Well, citizens need to get involved. Is this thing working? Citizens, is this working? No. The gods are against me here. Okay. Citizens should get involved in all kinds of process and question them. I was just looking at these things that this gentleman passed up here, and this is nothing but kind of a op-ed battle going on. Somebody put a letter in here and they responded, and that's just what they did. They called it a bunch of myths. They were using the propaganda technique called name calling. But I'm never satisfied quite with somebody telling me, well, my place is somewhere else, and sometimes I stumble into places I shouldn't be, but I'm going to fully participate as much as I can. And I'm going to challenge the things they tell me, and I am going to research it. If they tell me the sky is purple, I'm going to go and find out that it's really not, and then I'm going to tell everyone that the sky is actually blue. So I'm just kind of a stubborn person that way. So we all need to do that, find out the facts, and only disseminate the facts, and do them in a very simple way. Because they go on here with a lot of stuff about how the PSC is going to do this and this agency is going to do this, and everyone's going to check this very thoroughly. And well, then you're just giving up and letting these people do it for you. You're just a peon, and these people know better, so therefore you got to let them do what they want to do. So I'm not sure if that answers the question.
One of our problems in America is that the utilities for the last 100 years have been very dependable. We could depend on them to save us from things like voltage overload and having your house start on fire from faulty equipment and so forth. Our problem right now is that over those years we've let them learn all the inside stuff. They're the experts. Okay, if you don't know anything about electricity, if you don't know anything about how the service works, then you are at a huge disadvantage, because they can out-talk you with all kinds of big words, and you won't understand what they're saying. They'll just talk around you, talk you down. There's a book called The Grid. It is available through all of your libraries. You want to know what you're talking about, you want to defend yourself, you want to be able to talk intelligibly about the electric system and what's wrong with it and where we need to go with microgrids. That's your place to go. It's in your library, The Grid. It's by a woman named Gretchen Baca. She doesn't know a daggone thing about electric power. She sat a bunch of guys down that do know something about power, and she translated for you. You can have a grade school education, and you can understand exactly what she's saying. So educate yourselves. Don't go out with your arm tied behind your back because you don't know what you're talking about, because they aren't going to listen to you. So that's my suggestion for the day.
Thank you.
Mr. Jablonski, when you are looking at this case as you proceed, at what is this thing going to stay in the state court, assuming that it goes on, or then do you have federal issues beyond that? In other words, what are you and the town up against, and therefore what are the rest of us up against then?
All of these issues. Okay. Okay. All of these issues are state issues. We're in state court. The state court ends at the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court only takes the cases that it wants to take. So we've been at the circuit court level, and And we did win one of our issues there. Unfortunately, the effect of that win, which would have been to halt certain construction or revise certain construction, is not able to take effect. And the reason it's not able to take effect is because they've got the laws fixed that such that the town would essentially have to mortgage itself and get a bond in order to do that. And they would try to push up that bond price way beyond anything that the town could pay for. So you get basically, for certain, you get two levels of court. You get and you get the administrative agency before the PSC. You have to participate very effectively there. You have to require them to describe the alternative to this line to a degree of reasonable comparability. That's their responsibility. You have to guide them in that. There are people there probably at the PSC who still would actually like to do that. People like Mr. DeForest used to do that, used to want to do that. So that has to happen. And then there are two levels of appeal, Circuit Court and then the Court of Appeals. Those you have an absolute right to. The Supreme Court of the state of Wisconsin only takes the cases it feels like taking.
Hello, is this on? Okay, great. I'm reminded of the kid who wanted an ice cream cone, goes to mommy and daddy and said, I want an ice cream cone. And they say, well, little Billy, you don't really need an ice cream cone. You've already had dinner and stuff. Next time he goes to them for ice cream, he says, mommy, daddy, I need an ice cream cone. We're at that level with ATC and partners. They want to build the line because they'll make a hell of a lot of money. It's a want, not a need, and then they're flipping over to this term need, and as several people have said, they're not addressing need as the law says, instead they're addressing what they want with the word need thrown in there. Some of the people, the organizations involved in this, feel it's important to ask ATC, press ATC. A gentleman, a few questioners before me, said they've done that. And even when they don't answer the question, that's powerful, as long as we take that to the media, to the legislators, to everybody, and we say, we asked them this, they won't answer. We asked them that, they won't answer. If they answer, great, but even if they don't, that's a very powerful tactic. And I'd encourage the group from Dane County and everybody else, the people in Grant County who can't get much progress, to take that process forward. Keep asking the questions, keep pushing them, and if you don't get answers, write it down, repeat it to people, let everybody know they're hiding stuff. Thank you.
Hello? Can you hear me? My question is for Mr. Jablonski. You are working on the Badger Coulee line. We have Environmental Law and Policy Center working on Cardinal Hickory Creek. Are the two groups working with each other? In other words, are we in focusing on our specific line that we are against, and folks focusing on Badger Coulee, their specific law? Excuse me, are we missing an opportunity to work together and perhaps have more power in greater numbers?
Every one of these projects is decided on its own. So I know the folks at Environmental Law and Policy Center, but they're not part of our case. They're not part of the town of Holland's case. So they're good lawyers.
Do you share tactics or information or anything? Are you working together in any way because you have a common cause, even if you have different power lines?
No, we're not sharing tactics. We're not because we're not working on the same case. If we were working on the same case, then we would be, because that's what you do. Obviously, you want to work with all of your neighbors. Lawyers want to work with anyone who's aligned on their side, because that helps. But we're not on the same case, so no.
Hello. I would ask if your local representatives, have you spoken to them and have you gotten anything back from those folks? At least I've spoken in this area a little bit, and they have not been willing to share, at least with me. Yes.
How does this work? Very briefly, the Intermunicipal Energy Planning Committee has approached all 6 of the elected officials in this area. Sandy Pope, Dave Considine, Erpenbach, and 2 other senators have done something very proactive. They have written a letter to the Public Service Commission that says you actually have a discretionary power to do cost-benefit analysis. It's right there in your application requirements. Right now, you're just asking for descriptions. You need to beef up that language and ask for quantitative analysis. And this does not require legislation to do that. This is just, and the answer was very good. The answer was, the price of coffee in Brazil is whatever. I mean, they completely ignored the question, which from a legal perspective is, okay, go. The problem is we go to talk to our legislators. We've had substantive discussions. Many people in this room have had substantive sit-down discussions with their elected officials, the Nowak, Mark Line, Tranel, and the other 3 that I mentioned. They just need 50 more office visits. That's the bottom line. At which point we would sign up to come to the Capitol on March 8th, be there. This is the first of many trips that we're going to have to make. You heard Sandy say it's a political thing. Well, it might be a political thing, but the fact that Wisconsin doesn't do energy planning is not a partisan issue, right? So there's a lot of headway to be made. The Keryn's saying every single article that gets printed, you hit back and you hit back harder and you say thanks generously, et cetera. But does that answer your question about the legislation?
I'm Eric A. Bauman. I have talked to Todd Novak about some other issues. And he has twice voted. He's been one of 4 Republican Assembly people in this state who voted against some of Walker's most anti-environmental matters. In other words, he did not, and he said, and I was congratulating him about it. One was, lifting that, the Prove It First mine issue, and another was this cutback on the wetland protection. Both of those he opposed under great pressure not to oppose and to go along with the rest. And he said to me, I said, that must have taken a lot of courage. He said, I do what my area wants, what my voters want. And I asked him, well, what about our senator in this area, Mr. Markline? He didn't have much hope in that area. That's all I'll say. Okay, I'm just giving you examples of, I know there are others who aren't as maybe sensitive to what their voters want. But on some of these issues, assembly person in south of here, Pikeville area, also bucked the, yes, on some of these environmental issues. There is an ethic that a lot of farmers and landowners that my father and my grandparents stood with, that they believe that the earth is worth saving, and they were the firemen and the conservation farmers and we need to talk with them with respect and tell them we are counting on them to continue.